guys, if you're here for the first time, talk to us here in the chat box. Where are you guys from?
Yeah. Let us know where you're connecting from.
We're from Brazil.
We love interacting with people from all over the world, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, we're from Brazil. Yeah.
We're from Brazil. We are in Brazil right now, in completely different places.
Yeah,
Andre is very, very far from me right now.
I'm
super far.
I don't know, but I think I'm about 800 kilometers away, or almost 800 kilometers away from Rudy
a little bit
right
over,
now.
a little bit over 800
Could be
kilometers.
more. Could be could
but
be
just
more.
a little bit, just a little bit.
Yeah.
So yeah. So
Yeah.
what about you guys? Where are you from? Where are you watching us from? So let us know here in the chat box. And before we start addressing the questions that you asked us, and you guys, and thank you so much for the questions, by the way.
Yeah, a lot of great questions.
A lot of great questions, and we're going to address them. We try to structure the conversation with you guys today. So we created kind of like an outline, so we don't just answer questions random questions or at random.
Exactly.
But before we get into that, don't forget to please, Andre and we're going to share a link with you here in the chat box, because we do have a podcast called Chá Pedagógico.
That's the one.
And I nailed the pronunciation. She nailed it a couple of minutes ago. And in this podcast happens every last Sunday of the month.
There's the link in the chat.
There you go. Thanks, dude. And in this podcast, it's always the both of us, and we talk about language acquisition, applied linguistics, neuroscience, cognition, and pop culture, because we're super
geeky stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We are super geeks.
People don't know that, but Rudy has a major, huge comic book collection, in his apartment. Yeah, he's a super geeky guy, and he's a huge fan of Star Wars, just like me. Yeah.
Oh boy, yeah.
I have my Grogu t-shirt,
Exactly. Sue knows how big a fan I am of Star Wars, because I was wearing the socks and you made me show my Star Wars socks last year.
Yeah.
That was really funny, dude.
It was a C3PO sock, right? The yellow one. That was very cool. Yeah.
That was. All right. See, she remembers. She remembers. Does, right? Oh my goodness. I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing.
Well, it's recorded, so there's nothing you can do about it now. Yeah.
Oh boy. Yes.
But let me invite people to do something cool.
Go ahead.
Because we did one of our latest episodes on the podcast was about mobile phones and technology. And we would love if you guys could check it out. So you can go through the playlist that I've just shared in the chat. You can watch that and let us know what you think, because this is a very important discussion, right, Rudy? And I think we didn't really talk about that yesterday. Maybe we can touch on that a little bit today, because we have to start from somewhere, right?
Exactly.
and we decided to cluster, to group all of the questions together under different categories. And the first one is motivation, right, Rudy?
Exactly.
After all, without it, we don't do anything, right?
Nothing happens,
Yeah.
And for the very beginning of this conversation, again, we're not getting into the types of motivation, not now, but we are going to address that in a moment, okay? Because we do have mainly two different types of motivation. We have intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. We're not getting into that right now, but we will. Okay?
Yeah.
But the thing is, we need to motivate our students, because if they're not motivated, they're not going to pay attention. And if they don't pay attention, and again, regardless of the type of attention we're talking about here, it doesn't matter here right now. Okay?
Yeah.
But if they don't pay attention, there's no learning at all.
Precisely, yeah.
Attention is crucial for learning.
Yeah.
Learning languages, learning math, learning geography, learning chemistry, learning whatever.
How to ride a bike, how to play the guitar, how to cook,
and even how to develop our native language.
Yes.
We also need to have attention. And the whole conversation is, how can I motivate my student to do that? Well, here in Brazil, the scenario that we have in Brazil is because Portuguese is our official language. So, and we have roughly 6% of the entire population here in Brazil with some sort of proficiency level in English as a second language. So only 5 to 6%. We're a country with over 200 million people. So 5, 6%, you do the math. I'm not good at math. So I'm not going to do the calculation here. I'm not going to try.
Humanities, we're not from the exact areas.
Forget it. And my calculator is not here, but it's a very small number. And then, of course, our students, teenagers, kids, adult learners, they don't feel motivated to learn the language because they always say, why should I learn this language if when I go to a restaurant, I'm not going to use it. If I go to the movies, I'm not going to use a language. I'm only going to use a language if and only if I travel or talking about adult learners.
Job requirement, right? Yeah.
And maybe it's not going to happen every day, maybe once every 2-3 months, so it's our job or function as language teacher is to bring this motivation to our students. And this now is your cue, dude.
Yeah, that's the thing.
The extrinsic motivation.
Where does motivation come from? Basically, as Rudy said, there are two sources of motivation. And I think we need to understand at least the basic principles so we can help our students stay motivated, get motivated and stay motivated, right? And when we think about motivation from a psychological perspective, we think about the work of Ryan and DC. And they are the ones who talked about self-determination theory that has to do with intrinsic motivation. So intrinsic motivation is that genuine motivation that you have, that nobody has to offer you anything. Nobody has to convince you to do anything. It just comes naturally. And then you want to do things because you're interested, you're curious. They are, challenging enough for you. That's why you want to be, engaged in that endeavor, doing that task. But if you cannot find that intrinsic motivation, we can generate extrinsic motivation by offering certain things. Or, for example, here in Brazil, as Rudy mentioned, a lot of people don't want to learn English because they don't see a real purpose in doing that. But when their job says, hey, if you learn English, if you get a certificate, maybe I'll give you a promotion. That's an extrinsic motivator that might be powerful enough for people to learn English. So we have to find those in the classroom because either one will do something at the brain level that is very important. It will help you release dopamine. And dopamine is that neurotransmitter that helps you start engaging with something. Without that, you don't learn, right, Rudy?
Exactly. Absolutely right. And one of the questions you guys sent us is, how do I encourage my students to participate? What kind of strategies can I use to make our students more engaged, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? One of the strategies that we always recommend, we talked about this in previous episodes of our podcast, Chá Pedagógico. There's a book by John Hattie called Visible Learning. This is I think this is a very effective strategy to make our students engaged and motivated, because the idea is to show our students that they've been progressing. Language is not something tangible. It's not something that we can show a chart and tell them, guys, you started here and now no, it's something virtual. It's something that's out there. And many students have a hard time understanding their progress, understanding what they've already accomplished. So then one of the things we can do as teachers is to show them, and you can be very explicit. You can just tell them, guys, do you remember where you started? Did you know how to do that? And look, what have you just done? Oh, we've done this, this, and that. What was the task? What was the goal of the task? The goal was blah, 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 blah. Did you accomplish the goal? Did you accomplish the ultimate goal? Yes, we did. By doing what? By communicating, by using this kind of construction, that kind of group of words, et cetera, et cetera. So if we make learning visible, if we make our students make use of I'm using make all the time, but anyway. So we have our students make use of their metacognition, because metacognition is basically You sit down and you reason upon things, reason upon your attitudes,
What
your
helped you learn better,
performances.
right? Yeah.
Exactly. You can help your students do that. You can help your students uh, engage
Yeah.
their metacognition so they understand their evolution. This
Yeah.
may help them feel way more motivated, and then the
Exactly.
consequence is going to be, all right, I learned it.
And
Yoo-hoo, let's do that.
yeah,
Because this
there
is
are
going
two
to
things.
release a lot of dopamine. This sense of
Definitely.
achievement releases dopamine
There
as
you
well.
go. And that's, two things we can suggest here, really. One is instead of trying to extrinsically motivate your students so they get something done, help them get something done, be successful, and then they will get that sense of achievement. And that is intrinsically motivating. So there's a lot of
Mhm.
research about first you do something and then you do it well, you
Yeah.
succeed, and then that will help you. And the other thing that we can mention that we talked about a little bit yesterday is gamify parts of your lesson, because
Yes.
gamification with clear goals, rules of engagement, some competition, some
Hmm.
collaboration,
Regardless
those
of their age,
things.
okay, you can apply,
Exactly.
you can gamify your lessons with
It
adult
doesn't
learners as
matter.
well.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have
Those
to be
things
a
are very
game.
engaging. Yes.
That doesn't
Very
have to be a
engaging.
game. It can be just a challenge.
A quiz, for example,
It can be a quiz,
you cannot, you don't have to keep score necessarily, but
Exactly.
it's something that will be irresistible in terms of their curiosity. The need to know is very important. So if you start your lesson with a quiz about what you're about to teach them
Yeah,
to help them activate their prior knowledge, it's irresistible. They need to know the answer. So they want to engage, they want to participate, right, Rudy?
exactly. Absolutely right. And
Yeah,
this is something that must be part of your lesson plan.
that's true.
This is something that has to be planned ahead. Don't show up empty-handed. That's the idea. You have to have a script. Even if you don't
Yeah,
have the time to go to generate a very detailed lesson plan, create a lesson plan, create a script. Because if you
yeah,
have a script, then you're going to be able to either anticipate certain issues and or improvise. Because
that's it.
if you improvise all the time, then your students are going to notice, and this is not going to look good for you at
Yeah.
all. At all. They
And the
will
opposite is
recognize
also
that.
true, right? If you never go off script, you always follow the plan, then you're not taking advantage of
Like a robot.
emergent language, like opportunities that arise from the interaction with your students, right, Rudy?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Yeah.
And once you design a very effective lesson plan, I'm not going to say detailed because sometimes we don't have time for that. But
Yeah.
if you take the time and you sit down and dedicate part of your time to design a lesson plan, then one of the things that something I should have said yesterday, but I forgot, go backwards. First, you got to think about the ultimate goal. What
Yeah.
do I want? What do I want my students to learn after 60 minutes, 100 minutes, 90 minutes? I don't know. You know, I
Yeah.
want my students to be able to perform or to do this.
It's the
Great.
classic. By the end of the lesson, students will be able to, right? The intended learning
Exactly.
outcome. Yeah.
Then you go straight to the beginning of your lesson plan. And then you think, okay, what do I need to do throughout the 60 minutes, 100 minutes, 90 minutes, whatever? What do
Yeah.
I need to do throughout these minutes to make my students achieve that goal that I already put at the end, at the end of my lesson plan? And then you can think about the moments you're going to gamify, the moments you're not going to gamify, the moments you're going to introduce a linguistic model, the moments you're going to offer them opportunity for guided practice, correction. Am I going to correct? What kind of corrective feedback? What kind of corrective technique I'm going to use? I'm going to use here. That's what needs to be on your script. That's what needs to be
Exactly.
on your lesson plan,
Yeah.
and that's how you're going to be able to actually manage a mixed level classroom, because
Yeah.
it happens sometimes.
Yeah, you have to plan ahead. And basically what Rudy's talking about is something that Wiggins and McTighe discussed in their backwards design theory, well, or concept, So you look at the end of the process, so you understand where you want your students to get to. And then, most importantly, what kind of evidence can I collect to know if they're getting closer to that end goal, right? And that is very, very closely related to visible learning as well. So how do I know if my students learn the learning outcomes of the lesson? What kind of feedback and correction and what kind of monitoring or what kind of explicit instruction have to be part of my plan so that I can see. So learning has to be visible. I can see, not just feel like, oh yeah, I feel like my students know. You don't feel anything. I mean, you should feel something. No. But we're still not AI or robots, right? But what I'm saying is, don't rely too much and too blindly on your feelings when you're assessing your students. Collect evidence. What do I hear? What do I see? Make it visible, right? And then you can say, okay, I need to adjust here. I need to do something here, right, Rudy? So,
exactly.
And let's ask them before we
what
move
kind
on.
What kind of approach do you use with your students? What do you do in the classroom? How do you motivate your students?
Do you have a favorite method, favorite
do you have
framework?
A favorite method? We haven't talked about method yet. We were just talking about some approaches, but we are going to address that in a moment. But we would like to know, what do you do with your students when you're in the classroom?
Exactly.
How do you make them motivated? How do you manage mixed level classroom? Do you have a lot of students? Let us know here in the chat box here. We're very, very curious here because we have people from different countries. Maybe what works a lot here in Brazil maybe doesn't work very well in different parts of the world. We have games.
Games 2 hours ago. It's like we're reading your mind. Is that Joseph who's speaking?
I think it's Hannah.
Or Hannah. Oh, okay, Joseph is sleeping now, right? Okay, it's Hannah. See, I'm still thinking about yesterday, and I saw eFuture say, that's Joseph. It's Hannah.
Are you okay?
I think I have to change. This is a wild rose tea with a hibiscus and blueberry, and it's doing something.
Wait a minute, you didn't pour milk on it, right?
No. This is a herbal tea, man.
Okay, so this
milk
is a good
only
one.
For black tea, English breakfast tea. Okay, maybe Earl Grey. Yeah,
milk is for never
for no kind of tea at all. Yeah,
no kind of tea at all. But seriously, guys, let us know here in the chat box. We really want to know. Tell us what you do with your students. And one of the questions that we received was one of the best ways. What are the best ways to integrate technology? We promised we would talk about technology. We said we were going to address that issue, but before, Cherry, where are you from, Cherry? Online games, flashcards, drills, role playing. Okay, we're going to talk about role playing games, role playing activities. Just be careful, Cherry. Just one thing: be very careful with games. All right, because games, there is a very fine line between learning and entertainment. So if for some reason, Cambodia, all right, thank you so much for joining us. So if for some reason your students understand that game is some sort of entertainment, then the entertaining aspect of the game is going to surpass
the pedagogical purpose.
The pedagogical purpose. So just be careful.
Don't play games for the sake of playing games.
Exactly.
Do them for a reason, right?
That's why making your students understand what they've accomplished is very important, because then you bring them back. Because once you start playing games, I think it's a little bit inevitable that they are going to feel entertained. And that's okay. That's not a problem, But then what's our job? Okay, guys, let's get back on track here. Let me show you what you've accomplished by performing this activity here. In this case, the games. Okay, so you guys achieved this, and that. Because then they're going to be like, oh, okay, yeah. We played a game. It was really fun, but it wasn't just a game. We actually learned something.
Exactly.
Because if you do go over the top with playing games, there is also a chance that your student's going to ask for games every single class.
Every single class.
And
Yeah, that's
then
true.
why do you want to play games every time? Oh,
Yeah.
because it's fun. Remember the release of dopamine?
Yeah.
This games are going to have our students release dopamine. It's
Most
inevitable to.
definitely. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then they are going to be super quotes here. Okay. So they're going to be addicted to that because they are going to feel
Yeah.
good. And then
Yeah.
if for some reason that happens, then the pedagogical
Yeah.
aspect of your lessons of the
Yeah.
entire plan is doomed, is over.
And you know
Okay.
what? That applies also when we're talking about technology. If you always bring
Mm-hmm.
technology into your lesson for the sake of technology, because your students are expecting some tech, then we all know that we are all addicted to technology, especially phones, right? And there are many experts today talking about how it's almost impossible to engage teenagers because everything else feels boring, right?
Yeah.
Because they can get that very cheap release of dopamine by very quickly, watching a TikTok video or playing a game or whatever. So when they don't have that, they are forced to be bored. And being bored is very important for cognitive and emotional development because you
Mm-hmm.
have to learn how to self-regulate. You have to learn how to train your executive functions and especially your inhibitory control. So what happens is don't just bring technology for the sake of technology in your class, make it purposeful, right?
Mm-hmm.
We want to reiterate something from last night when we were talking about one way for you to kind of organize that, like we're doing here with the topics, is use the frameworks. You
Exactly.
you guys like PPP, presentation, practice, and production. Okay. You like ESA, engage, study, activate. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to do something more task based? Do you want to work with PBL, project
TBL,
based learning?
PBL. Yeah.
Okay, so that's a good way to structure your lesson and kind of, anticipate where you can add maybe here a game, maybe here some drilling, maybe here freer practice so that they can, interact with each other and then I can
Yeah.
monitor and give feedback. But do not choose one and then use it as a straight jacket. Be creative, right? You are the boss,
Mm-hmm.
and your students
Mm-hmm.
are the center. So you're
Yeah.
trying to help them learn. Don't just do this because all my teachers did it, all their teachers did it, so I'm just replicating this old model. Be critical about what you're using, right?
Exactly, because this
Yeah.
is a term that many teachers always talk to us about. Oh, I want to foster critical thinking in my group, etc. Okay, but
Yeah.
what about you as teacher? Let's start from you guys. Do you make use? Are you being critical towards the textbooks that you use, towards the exercises that are assigned to you, and the
Yeah.
exercises that you're assigning to your students? What about your lesson plan? Are you just copy and paste a lesson plan that's already in the textbook, or being
Yeah.
critical about it? Because, of course, there are
Exactly.
many very well designed lesson plans in many well designed textbooks, but those textbooks don't know your students. You know your students. So, the textbook, the lesson plan in the textbook should be a starting point for you. Take a look at the lesson plan that you have in your book, and then be critical by saying, this is going to work. This ain't going to work. I'm
Yeah.
going to modify this. I'm going to make some adjustments here and there. And then you perform that because you know your students better, sometimes better than their parents,
Yeah, that's
uh,
true.
because there are many, many types of parents out there nowadays. But
Yes.
so you need to be very critical towards that. For instance, uh, if you open a book, if you open your textbook and you see an activity that says, have your students read out loud. Why? Why do you need to have
Yeah.
your students read something out loud? Because I want to practice pronunciation. Great. Why do they need to read in order to practice pronunciation? First, when you're developing your oral skills, you don't need to read anything. For think,
It's a different skill, right?
it's a completely different skill.
Yeah,
Think
it's a
about when you
productive
were a
skill.
kid,
Yeah.
when you guys were a kid. Did you have to read anything in order to have your pronunciation corrected or to have your pronunciation mastered? No, you didn't. Why? Because
It
it's a
took you
completely
years to
different.
learn how to read, right? Yeah.
Exactly, because it's a completely different situation. So you don't need that. And there's one more thing. If you give them a piece of text, written text, and
Yeah.
have your students read out loud just to practice pronunciation, that pronunciation is not going to be very realistic because there
Yeah.
is a big chance that there's not going to be any linking sound. There's not going to be any deletion. There's not going to be anything phonologically speaking.
And they won't be
Actually,
paying
there's
a lot
not
of
going to be any
attention, you
phonological
know?
any. There's not going to be
Yeah.
any phonological anything, because they're not speaking.
And we know, dude, from research that when students are asked to stand
Mm,
up in the middle of their lesson and read
yeah,
aloud in front of an audience, right?
yeah.
They go into survival mode, the FFF response in the brain, fight,
Oh,
flight,
oh, go back, go back,
freeze.
go back.
Yeah.
FFF.
The FFF. Yeah. The FFF
Again, tell
response in the
them.
brain.
Tell them what
So
FFF is.
so you have something in your brain.
Ah,
So
Hannibal's here.
medial temporal lobe. So you have a structure called the hippocampus. It has to do with memory consolidation and retrieval. And on the tip of your hippocampus, you have something called the amygdala. So it looks like a very small nut, actually.
Yeah.
And it it's activated when you sense danger. It's like the Spider-Man. We had to
Yeah.
geek out a little bit, right?
It's the
So you
spider
guys
sense.
remember the spider sense, right? The Spider-Man sense of danger. So it's kind of like that, but it's ours is not so enhanced as in Spider-Man. Okay, but anyway, so if that is activated, there is not a lot of learning happening right there. There's not a lot of conscious learning because the only thing your brain cares about is maintaining your physical integrity. So if you are exposed to a bunch of people who might laugh at you, who might think you are stupid because you're reading wrong, and your teacher is going to correct you in front of all of them, you're
Yeah.
not learning. So that's a very bad way to practice pronunciation. Having
Mm-hmm.
someone read aloud in front of the whole group. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah.
And there's one more thing. This is not speech at all.
Yeah.
So why having through all the hassle for something that's not going to be very effective? No. Um, I think it's Walton and Bertram that said in their book from a long time ago. I don't remember the year. I'm sorry, I don't remember the year, but I remember the
Yeah.
book. And they said speech is something unexpected. So if you really want, if you
Spontaneous. Right?
spontaneous.
Yeah.
So if you really want to teach or to improve your students' oral skills, they have to be ready to cope with these spontaneous activity. And it's true.
Exactly.
If I stop speaking right now, you guys have no idea what I'm about to tell you. If I just shut up for 2 seconds, you won't know what I'll say because you don't know. It's unexpected. But the thing is, as I'm speaking, my voice is reaching out to you, and you guys in your brains, you're receiving my sound waves and everything I'm speaking. You're processing that. You're making meaning out of that because me as a speaker, I'm in my mind, I'm selecting the chunks that I'm going to use so I can be understood by you guys. I'm not just, throwing words and constructions at a random pace here. It's part of my cognitive activity. I'm making some selections. I'm making, keep Hannibal there because we're going to
Our
talk about
brains are
Broca's
amazing. Hannah
and
just said,
Vernix. We're talking about
yeah,
Vernix and
yeah,
Broca in a moment. You are,
yeah.
So the idea is have your students ready for that. Before I talk about one of the strategies to prepare them for that, because as I'm speaking, my voice is reaching out to you, so you're processing all of this, and then if for some reason you need to speak, unfortunately, we don't have the time to have this exchange, so we're talking and we're using the chat box, which is okay. It's more than enough today. you know. But imagine if we were sitting at a table when we actually had a moment to have to make this exchange ideas. So you would process what I'm saying, you would use a vernix area that Andre is going to talk about, and then
Yes,
you would activate your Broca's area in the brain in order to
exactly.
physically articulate your jaws
That's
and
it.
everything else in order to keep the exchange going. And we're just talking about
Yeah,
two areas of our brain, but
yeah.
that doesn't mean that only these two areas are activated when we're
No,
speaking
no.
at
Actually,
all.
a lot of your brain is activated when you're using language, and which busts, the myth that we only use 10% of the brain.
Uh,
But what
this
Rudy's
is for
talking about,
Hollywood.
that's for Hollywood, right? Lucy was the name of the movie, right? With
Uh-huh.
Scarlett Johansson and
Yeah.
Morgan Freeman as the guy, the professor. But anyway, what Rudy's talking about is, and that tells us something about receptive and productive skills, because you asked us, how do you teach different skills? And I
Mm-hmm.
think the most important rule is use it or lose it. That's how the brain practices anything. And since there are different memory systems or different, they are actually located in different regions in the brain. There's no point in using one skill to practice the other. One skill can help or aid the other. So, like
Yeah.
Rudy said, when you are producing speech, so when you're articulating, when you're using the mechanics of your vocal tract to produce sound, to externalize your language via sound orally, then you are using a lot of your Broca's area, right? So it's
Mm-hmm.
here, and it's actually close. So it's basically here. This is the frontal lobe, and this is the temporal lobe, and your Broca's area is here. Now, when you are understanding, comprehending speech, or even written language, then you are accessing your Wernicke's area, and your Wernicke's area communicates, of course, with your Broca's area, because we're always, making sounds, speaking, producing speech, but also understanding language. So you are not going to help your students speak better by having them read more. I mean, they will pick up some words, new vocabulary, they will understand the meaning of those words, and they can use that in their speech, of course, but not if they never use their speech. And that's the thing. A lot of teachers, they think, okay, it's like we talked about, driving a car or riding a bike. You will never be able to do those things if you don't do those things. You can watch as many tutorials you want. You can observe people doing that, but you'll never actually be able to do those things until you go there yourself and you do those things.
Mm-hmm.
That's why you can only help your students improve their speaking skills by having them speak,
Exactly.
and listening skills by exposing them to listening activities, by talking to them, getting people to talk to them, right, Rudy? That's how,
Exactly.
how it works. Yeah.
There's a very, very good linguist. Every time there is a research or his name was involved, Robert Kaiser.
Ah, yes,
And
yes.
there is a book called Practice in Second Language Acquisition. If I'm not wrong, this is the title of the book. And he basically says language has to be used in order for a language to be developed. And this is absolutely
Yeah,
correct. Uh, just to mention a couple of other names that I really
yeah,
uh, these names are my guidance, like Michael Tomasello, Eva
yeah,
Dabrowska, and William Kraft. These are all cognitive linguists, and they conduct researches related to language acquisition under the lens of cognitive linguistics. And
yeah,
they say, why is language necessary, or why do languages have to be used in order to be developed? Because once the language is developed, is used, this we as infants, as teenagers, as adults,
yeah,
with time, everything tends to become metalinguistic. But when we're infants, when things are not metalinguistic at all, we do this more often. But the thing is, we pay attention to the situation that's going on, everything that's around us. And we associate whatever is around us with the language that's being used.
Yeah.
And then through that association, we create something called concepts. So we store these concepts or these meanings in something that we call mental space. It's something in our minds. And then every time we try to describe the same situation, the same object, the same whatever, we are going to retrieve the chunk, the situation, and we are going to produce the same linguistic chunk. Okay. That's why language has to be used to make this combination.
And
if
you know
language
what?
is not used, there's not going to be any combination, combination.
That's why teaching grammar should be something that you do more inductively.
Yeah.
And then if you want to, you can do it more deductively. But I think starting with the concrete example and allowing your students to figure out how this works by giving models, for example, is a way to avoid cognitive overload. Because usually, traditionally, teachers, they teach grammar very explicitly. So we talk about the rules, and we talk about the rules in English. So we're using the language to explain the rules of the language. And our students, they don't have that language proficiency to be able to get everything we're explaining. They don't even know the rules of their own language. And we think this is an effective way to teach, but it's not really. It's what Rudy just described, you know. If they understand how and when to use the chunk, because you've modeled it, you know, they've associated a situation, a context with that chunk, then you can, if you want to, talk about the grammar rules, especially with adults, you know, because adults, they're curious, they want to know more, they want to download a worksheet or something to understand the grammar better. But with kids and teenagers, that gets even more irrelevant, you know, because will they really need to know all those rules? If they're going to, I don't know, maybe there's a proficiency exam coming, and then they have to know, you know, because there will be an activity. Okay, of course, that makes sense. But again, if you start from that explicit teaching context and then just fill their memory, their working memory, with a lot of words they don't even know in their own language, the labels, the verb tenses, the word classes that they don't know really in their language, what you're doing is a disservice, because they will experience cognitive overload. This is not going to help you teach those grammar structures, right?
And in the case of adult learners, that would make more sense, even though we're not advocating for this at all. We're just saying it could make more sense, especially because there is this linguist called Jürgen Diesel. And he basically says, once we have our native language consolidated, the native language is going to serve as a basis for future languages that we learn.
Like a template.
A template. Yeah. And we're going to overlap L2, L3, L whatever with the native language. So for adults, they have their first language or their native language consolidated. So this could be a very nice idea. And again, especially because as we grow older, everything tends to become metalinguistic. We use the language to explain whatever we're saying. So we use the language to explain how your work needs to be done. We use the language in order to explain what not to do when you're dealing with a teenager. So everything tends to become metalinguistic.
Exactly.
And that's okay. And then for adult learners, that could make sense. But it's also very important to help your adult learners make use of the chunk and analyze the situational aspect. Am I going to use this chunk in order to describe this situation? Yes. No. I'm going to use this. Yes. Am I going to use this chunk to describe an object, to describe an activity? We don't know. But it's important to explore this aspect, this linguistic aspect, and also this cognitive aspect of language acquisition. And more importantly, because we only have 2 more minutes, correct your students. Don't be afraid of making corrections.
That if you do that, that will inform what you should prioritize when correcting your students, because feedback is of the essence. We know that, but feedback can be done in many different ways. So most of us here are familiar with, on the spot correction, delayed correction, or, if you're correcting for, I don't know, fluency or accuracy. So if you want your students to be engaged in an interactive activity, to, I don't know, practice their fluency. So you don't want to intervene too much, but you want to take notes and then give them some feedback later. Whatever you choose to do, one thing that should be crystal clear is that your feedback has to be very specific and transparent and not crushing. So again, we're going back to motivation so I can wrap up, is if you crush your students' hopes, because you give them feedback in a very mean way, because you just focused on the negative aspects of his production or whatever, that means that student will be less likely to want to participate in the future because maybe he felt intimidated, humiliated. So be transparent, be constructive, say, you did this well, but here you can improve and I can help you. Right, Ruby?
Yeah. And again, when we say correct your students, we are not advocating for overcorrecting.
Yeah.
Okay. Because this is also demotivational. If you correct your students all the time, there's going to be a time when your students are going to say, I'm not going to speak anything because everything I say, my teacher corrects me. Exactly. That's why you need to have a very well-designed lesson plan, because then in the lesson plan, even the moments you're going to make correction and the techniques you're going to use have to be on the paper. So you don't do that. So you don't overcorrect your students. So if you don't correct at all, your student's going to be like, okay, whatever I say, my teacher is never going to correct me. So whatever. And if you overcorrect, your students are going to say, every time I open my mouth, my teacher is already correcting me. Yeah, there's something wrong. And sometimes because there are a lot. I think you posted some very important numbers that I think over 60%, if I'm not wrong, 60% of English teachers in the world are not native speakers. And this can be the overcorrection can be rooted in this insecurity that we have. Okay, I'm not a native speaker. And then what can happen if you overcorrect? As soon as you correct something right from right. Exactly. Because of insecurity. So we need to find a balance. You need to find a common ground. So you need to correct your students. All right.
They're expecting it and they learn from it. And
exactly.
This is it, guys, right? We're done.
Oh
no. This is the last round.
More.